For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we talk to leaders of the cannabis community, everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. Massachusetts was the very first state to create a social equity program. Since then, a lot of other states that have legal programs have looked to Massachusetts' program as a blueprint when it comes to finding a way to make restitution to the communities most impacted by the prohibition of cannabis. However, 4 years later, Massachusetts only has one social equity business up and running and open. Today, I'm talking to Michelle Morris. She's the regional director of Kenwood Security Consulting. Michelle helps companies work through the license application, and she's watched a lot of what's happened in Massachusetts firsthand. It's a really interesting story with huge stakes. It also might just involve some local government corruption. We'll break down what's happened over the past 4 years and talk about how, while social equity applicants are still largely kept on the sidelines, police departments in Massachusetts have found a huge financial windfall from legal cannabis. There's a lot to get to, so let's get right to it. First, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to start by talking about this word equity that we hear so often. And I went and just looked up a definition of it. What do we mean when we talk about equity? And it actually has two definitions. It means to be fair or impartial, but it also means the value of shares in a company, which leaves us with the very interesting situation that often equity is not equitable. So I guess my question for you is, when people talk about equity within the cannabis industry, what kind of equity are they talking about? Which definition are we actually using here?
I think in the cannabis industry, we look to equal access to ownership. Equal access to opportunity. So fairness plays a role, but again, as you said, exactly what is fair? It's such a hard word to define. And when you think about social equity, equal access to the application process, equal access to ownership, is more what the aim is. It is more of an economic empowerment and ability to earn a part of this pie. Because let's get it right, social equity in the cannabis industry, 9 times out of 10 is not going to mean equality financially. But equity gives us an opportunity to earn a portion of this big pie.
And when people talk about the groups that typically fall under the social equity label in the cannabis industry, who are they typically talking about?
When we're referring to social equity, in most cases, we're referring to, Black and Hispanic men, generally, because they have been disproportionately affected by prohibition. And despite the fact, again, that we have this word social equity, we're seeing that there's still disproportionate impact to minority-owned businesses. But the target typically is to right the wrongs of prohibition to Black and Hispanic men.
And so going back to the creation of this original social equity program in Massachusetts, is it fair to say that the original aim or intent of that program was to make sure that the groups and communities that historically have been victimized by the prohibition were given an opportunity to benefit off legalization?
Yes, and it's clear in their mission statement. They definitely were interested in righting the wrongs to the what we call the disproportionately impacted, and they even would go as far as giving points to those who had been arrested or convicted of minor drug offenses. which we see some of the other social equity programs trying to copy.
And so just to jump in here, the points that you're talking about are basically it's a system that gives additional priority to people who qualify as social equity applicants by earning these points. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the one that I like to target is the points that are received because you were affected, incarcerated, convicted of minor possession offenses. And I like to use that because to me, that is the ultimate target of social equity, where you've had a person historically during prohibition that was arrested for what is now legal.
And so when this program was first implemented, what was the general feedback from the community advocates? How did it go over?
Well, generally it came across well. Everyone thought that it meant that, I fill out my application today, it's reviewed tomorrow, and by Wednesday, I have an opportunity to open up my shop. But we have seen that there have been quite a number of barriers from the actual submission of an application to the actual opening.
So let's talk about that process a little bit, because it is the case that, at least in Illinois, you don't necessarily earn points for being a certain member of a certain race. That being said, it has been very expressly said that racial diversity is one of the priorities or objectives of a program like this. Is it the case that in certain states, perhaps in Massachusetts or others, that you can actually benefit or be given priority specifically because you are from one of these protected groups?
Yes. Yeah, actually, it's not totally race neutral. You get points for belonging to, in certain states, African American, Hispanic, women. What we do find is that many of the laws or social equity programs don't specifically address veterans or disabled persons.
In the months after Massachusetts implemented this social equity program, it started to become clear that some of the beneficiaries or businesses were encountering barriers to getting up and running. What were some of the problems that they were running into?
Well, we found that we would see the commission come back and ask for additional information. The application may have been deficient in its explanation as to security, a security plan, for example, and they may have needed to provide additional information. Well, one of the biggest barriers that we hear the social equity applicants complain about, and these are the provisional recipients. And with a provisional license, Massachusetts is a little different. With a provisional license, it is the same as basically having a license pending your final inspection. So we would find that with the provisional licensees, they were lacking in information, and they would then turn back and send the information to the commission, and it would take a long time to come back. And then they'd come back and ask, well, hey, this plan does say that you're going to use security company X to install cameras. How are you going to monitor the cameras? And so instead of asking all the questions at once, they would keep going back and forth. So it was almost as if, I don't want to say this, but nitpicking. But Massachusetts is known for nitpicking on their license period because of some of the other issues they've had. For example, and I don't want to jump around too much, but for example, they were finding that, and this happened also in Ohio, that they had awarded a social equity or a minority owned business a license, only to find out that it was masked by a lease or management agreement. So what was happening is some of these large companies, and I will mention one that has had both in Massachusetts and Ohio, Acreage Holdings, had that happen to them with a company in Massachusetts and then two companies in Ohio, where they were basically the investors and backers, and the minority was just involved in a management agreement or a lease agreement. So in essence, you would have myself, for example, may have been awarded a social equity in Ohio, and I was given a job by Acreage Holdings, but the job was more of a figurehead job. I was given maybe $100,000, maybe even $200,000 to sit as the quote unquote owner of this company. But in truth and in fact, I was not the real owner. And I basically had an agreement that provided me with what is usually a very good salary. But the reality is, what is 200,000 compared to 2 million a week that you're earning?
Right. It's quite literally a way to get around equity.
That's the and a loophole that we're finding has been occurring. And, I play the devil's advocate with someone regarding this, saying that, well, isn't that a good thing? That means we're getting in management. But the reality is, one, as the owner, manager, whatever, under these management agreements, I had no authority. So I couldn't say, okay, I want to hire Jesse because, I know Jesse knows cultivation like he knows the back of his hand. I have no management, no decision-making authority. And therefore, there's no autonomy. And then the question becomes, what happens when those management agreements are up?
That's a really good point. And it actually leads into a larger discussion, because I think beyond just correcting some of the injustice that was caused by the war on drugs, it leads into this issue where these licenses, especially for medical operators that were granted first crack at those licenses, are extremely powerful, especially for operators who might already be vertically integrated. It sets up a position where we almost have monopolies. And so this is an issue of fairness in just about every sense.
Yes, it does. It goes beyond fairness. You're now, like you said, you're now operating what borders on monopolies, which again now turns to an issue of affordability. Because if I have every cannabis facility in the state, or I own the majority of license, and there are only two other competitors, you guys basically have the ability to fix the market, to do what you want, price-wise, quality-wise, safety-wise. Again, I'll give you an example. We get a lot of complaints here in Florida that people are going in for product, and when you get the product and you get home and you open the bud, there's mold in there. Who is tracking that these things aren't happening? Expiration dates are, you have product on shelves that have expiration dates. And that's what happens when you have monopolies. There are less policing of these organizations, and quality can go out the window. So it's not just about righting the wrongs of prohibition. The MSOs may not want to come into my community, which requires me to go and travel maybe half hour, 45 minutes out of my way just to get my medicines. So now you're talking about the issues that we see sometimes in the disproportionately impacted communities of access to healthcare. So with those monopolies come those issues too, access to getting medical marijuana. I'm not even going to address the recreational side, but just the medical marijuana, which is a major issue.
So circling back to where we were with the program in Massachusetts, one of the particulars of that program that became a sticking point was the need for businesses to go out and acquire what's known as a host community agreement with a municipality where they plan to open. Do you have a sense of how that played into some of the specific problems in that state?
One of the things that we saw is that from time to time it was a little bit difficult for them to get approval. But what we also found is that many times they secured the approval and they would secure a facility, but again, because of delays, the participants were spending thousands of dollars. There was one social equity applicant who had spent approximately $10,000 a month for 2 years and still has not been up and operational yet. So he was paying rent for 2 years on a property. It's just not one issue. If it was just the one issue, then it wouldn't have been so bad because, once one person resolves an issue and you're able to finalize that issue, that can be copied and modeled throughout different communities. But the commission requires you to also have your building in tow, basically. As a social equity business, your funding is limited in and of itself. So now you're spending $10,000 a month for 2 years. You're in $200,000. What happens when I'm ready to finally open the shingle? I have no money for product. I have no money to, implement hiring of personnel. So there are a lot of different issues that arose. And what we see is that, again, these 70 applicants who've gotten some type of approval, whether it's a pre-approval or a provincial license, they're still fighting barriers to actually open their physical business. They've had back and forth town halls. And as a result of what the most recent town hall, I believe in July, one of the things the commission did do is put one person in charge of resolving questions and gathering information, when they have a request for information, that the one person was designated as the person that all the questions and all the answers and clarifications were sent to, so that it wasn't sent to 10 different places and waiting 10 different people's responses.
Massachusetts Cannabis Commissioner said that they actually believe that this policy unintentionally gives too much power to municipalities to determine which businesses might get a license by creating regulations or additional rules, like you mentioned. It does also seem like in some cases municipalities did abuse that power. What do you think? Is it fair to say that municipalities were given too much power to dictate who and where licenses were distributed?
Yes. You have to have a set standard. And if a business meets the requirements on the state level and then meets all the city ordinances or township ordinances, they shouldn't be experiencing such delays. But again, if you put it into the hands of Michelle, who is the town commissioner, with no requirements, I can now say, well, look, I need to know that your doors are purple because this is the way we want it. So yes, it gave them leeway without giving them a structure. So if they had provided specific structural requirements, again, they need to be 10 feet from school. Those certain things already exist, but you give me the opportunity to now add additional requirements, and these requirements can vary considerably depending on where it is and who that person is that is in charge of making those decisions based with the host agreements. Social equity companies tend not to be able to, they don't have the millions that these big MSOs or the big corporations have. We're going to eventually run out of money. So after I've expended all this money and you turn around and say, okay, you can go and open now, I have no more money left. That now does away with my license. And in the meantime, Company X, who is a white-owned company who has more money, who has the ability to come in and quote-unquote donate educational programs, donate to the library, do whatever it takes, can now come in and compete and lock me out of my own license that has already been issued.
So the reality of the situation is that until recently, Massachusetts did not actually have a social equity applicant business up and running at all. Just in what you've witnessed, would you say that there has been a pattern of prejudice playing into who gets licensed?
Well, definitely. Now, this is, of course, my opinion. I do believe that in certain situations, that's exactly what's done. You delay with the arbitrary areas that are not objective, subjective portion. It's sort of like, I liken it to affirmative action. Affirmative action exists, but there's no doubt that there are loopholes that can be had to prevent someone from opening. I can say I just don't like the way the building has been secured. That's an opinion thing. And then say, well, based on this factor, you need additional security. You need to do this. You need to do that. It's like the interview where you go in and corporation has the interview with the female applicant, but the interviewer says, well, I love her credentials. I think she's brilliant, with the Harvard degree and everything, but she just didn't pass the interview well. She, and that's so subjective. So that's the point I'm making, that if you have a set standard of regulations or requirements that have to be met, and if you limit the subjectivity, then I think that we would have seen a lot more license. There's just got to be something there why out of 70 applications that have been approved in different stages, you have one company up and running almost 2 years later.
In March of this year, Politico reported that there were as many as 70 cases where municipalities, through their host community agreements, were actually requiring businesses to pay financial sums or fees or in some way contribute financially to the town or municipality. And in some of these cases, they definitely seem to be illegal. I kind of just want to get your reaction to that and see if you have any thoughts about where to go from here.
It wouldn't surprise me. And again, that goes back to what I say. If we have a set standard of regulations, so if the host company, if the host agreement requires you to do 10 steps, you cannot do 11. And I think that it's imperative that the commission, based on what we're seeing, if once these investigations have found that, yes, they're asking them to pay, whatever this fee is, above and beyond what any other business would pay, then we really have to figure out, how do we apply these social equity licenses? It's great to have it on paper, but the actual implementation has to be improved in some way.
I think you actually just said it in a way that I think is going to really resonate with people, which is the idea of the 11th rule. I love that, because it's like if you create a game that has 10 rules and all 10 of those rules are fair, if you create an 11th rule that undermines all of the other 10, your game is no longer fair.
That's correct.
So in this case, it sounds like you are challenging governments to create clear rules and policies that will basically just prevent this from happening.
That's correct. That's correct. So again, what does priority mean? A priority review says that you need to get my application in within 30 days. Host agreements need to be resolved within a specific period of time. If the 10 regulations aren't met, you have to show me why on the 31st day that this company is legitimately still being stymied from opening up or getting that host agreement finalized.
So let's jump forward to where we are today. As you mentioned, there is one social equity applicant business up and running, and there's also currently an amendment which would allow the council to review HCAs. Do you have hopes that that's going to pass? And if it does, do you see that as something that will speed up the process, or is it just another opportunity to get stuck in red tape?
Well, I think that the commission has realized, again, that, their intentions are good, but good intentions are, only worth the actual action that can be taken. And so we hope that the amendment will pass, which would, in my opinion, help to speed up the process. Again, what do you say to 70 applicants who've been given approvals, yet only one is currently up and operating? Again, the commission in Massachusetts and the patient advocacy groups have done a tremendous job in getting these legislation put down to create social equity. But you give me all this opportunity and all these points and give me social equity, but who's going to offer me a loan? The issues are almost diametrically opposed. What bank is going to give a former drug dealer or a former felon, it doesn't even have to be a drug dealer, the opportunity to get a loan? They can't vote, for Christ's sakes, in most states. Here in Florida, by referendum, we said, look, if you have a felony record and you have done your time and you come out and you meet certain requirements, you should have the right to vote. They've taken that right away, even though the people have said this is what we want. So again, good intentions. It's not worth the paper it's written on without actual action. And what we're seeing is that these companies, these applicants are expending a great deal of money with still no revenue being returned because they cannot open their doors.
We've spent a lot of time talking about who is unable to profit off of cannabis. And if we're talking about that, of course, the mirror question is who is currently profiting. And about 3 weeks ago, there was an article in the Boston Globe that reported that in 2019, Massachusetts police departments actually took in $1.1 million in overtime payments for police officers working security at dispensaries. In addition, the Cambridge Police Department took in $112,500 in cruiser and administrative fees. What are some of the thoughts that you have about police officers profiting while the reality is that social equity applicants are being kept out?
Well, ironically, you think about it, the policing is the criminal justice system, period, is what has helped to create this quote-unquote disproportionately impacted community. It is the police that chooses to arrest, and they have much discretion as to who they arrest, what they arrest for, is benefiting. And they're benefiting before the social equity groups are, and they're benefiting at a much higher rate. You've got 69 companies that still haven't opened their doors yet, So social equity is a good thing, but we still have a long ways to go. We're not even asking for total equality. That's not what happens with social equity. We see that now.
There seems to be places where, despite stated intentions, the actual reality is that kind of the classic beneficiaries of equity continue to be the beneficiaries of equity.
That's correct. That is correct. And again, going back just towards that same notion that with the social equity, I looked at Michigan, and Michigan, one of the things they give points to, or not points, but reduction in fees to, are people who have lived in these disparately impacted communities. The reality is, how many applicants that live in the south side of Chicago are going to actually be able to submit an application, pay for application fees, which are non-refundable, and be able to get a business up and running? I looked at the Michigan statute and I just kind of chuckled to myself. You get 25% reduction for living in one of those communities in the last 5 years. Those communities can barely pay their rents. Where are they going to come up with a $6,000, even if you reduce the fee to $1,000? Where are they going to come up with the money for just that? Just to apply. Needless to say, actually open up and run a business. So again, on paper it looks great, but we've got to do better.
Michelle Morris is the regional director of Kenwood Security Consulting. Michelle, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and breaking that all down for us. I really appreciate it. And anytime you want to come on and talk about it, you're so more than welcome.
Thank you very much, Jesse. It's been a pleasure.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend. Thank you for listening.